Judge uses his power to protect his killer's son, but one cop refuses to stay silent. The weight of the truth burned in Officer Jordan Wells' chest like a live wire. Dangerous, untamed, and impossible to ignore. He had uncovered the darkest secret in the city. Ethan Bradford had killed Darius King, and his powerful father, Judge Richard Bradford, had buried the evidence. The system was rigged, the police were silenced, and anyone who stood in the way was destroyed. But Jordan wasn't like the others. He wasn't afraid to stand alone. He had proof, and he was ready to expose them all even if it meant losing everything. The night air was heavy outside the small store on Oakwood Avenue. The streetlights shone dimly, casting long shadows on the ground. Ethan Bradford's hands were tight fists. His face was red with anger as he stood close to Darius King. They had argued inside the store, but now, outside, things were worse. "I don't care who your father is," Darius said, his voice firm. "You can't talk to me like that." Ethan's heart pounded. He was not used to people talking back to him. His father was an important man, and people usually stayed quiet. But Darius was not afraid. This made Ethan's anger grow. "Watch your mouth," Ethan said, stepping forward. Darius shook his head. "Or what?" Ethan did not think. His anger took over. He swung his fist. It hit Darius hard in the face. Darius stumbled back against the wall. The sound of the hit echoed in the empty street, but Ethan did not stop. He hit Darius again and again. He did not hear Darius shout. He did not feel his own hands hurting. He only felt rage. Then Ethan stepped back, breathing hard. Darius lay on the ground, not moving. His body looked strange, twisted in a way that was not normal. His chest was still. His eyes, which had been full of anger before, were now empty. Ethan's stomach felt sick. He had not planned this. He had not thought. "Oh no," he whispered. His hands shook. His heart pounded loudly in his ears. He looked around. The street was empty. No one had seen. But someone would come. Someone would find out. He grabbed his phone. His hands were sweaty as he dialed. His father answered quickly. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice shaking. I did something bad. Where are you?" Judge Richard Bradford's voice was calm, steady. "Outside the store on Oakwood. I think he's dead." There was silence for a moment. Then his father spoke, his voice cold and firm. "Go home. Say nothing. I will take care of it." The phone call ended. Judge Bradford put his phone down and took a deep breath. He knew his son had a bad temper, but this was serious. He could not panic. He had to act fast. He picked up his phone again and called someone he trusted. Detective Frank Holloway answered. "Your Honor, there is a problem," the judge said. Holloway did not ask for details. He never did. "Where?" "Oakwood Avenue. Outside the store. I'll take care of it." The call ended. Judge Bradford leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. It was done. Holloway would handle everything. Detective Frank Holloway arrived at the scene a few minutes later. The red and blue lights of his car flashed in the dark street. He stepped out, his long coat moving in the wind. He looked at the body on the ground. Another officer stood nearby. "The dead man's name is Darius King," the officer said. "Looks like a street fight." Holloway nodded. "Any witnesses?" "No one has come forward." Holloway bent down and looked at the body. He saw a security camera above the store's door. He turned to the officer. "Give me the security footage." The officer hesitated. "Shouldn't we?" Holloway gave him a cold look. "Now." A few minutes later, Holloway watched the footage on the store's small screen. He saw everything. Ethan's anger, the fight, the final hit. Holloway sighed. This could not stay on record. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket, inserted it into the computer, and erased the video. He put the drive back in his coat, making sure no one saw. He turned to the officer. "Write this up as gang violence. Say it was a random attack. No suspects." The officer frowned. "Sir, there is no sign of a gang fight." "There is now." Holloway walked to his car and pulled out his phone. He sent a few messages to the right people. Soon, the story would change. People would hear that Darius King was part of a gang, that he was killed in a street fight, that there was no suspect, no reason to investigate further. By the time the sun rose over Oakwood Avenue, the truth had already disappeared. The sun was setting over Oakwood Avenue when Officer Jordan Wells walked into the police station. He was young and full of energy. He wanted to do good work and help people. That morning, his boss gave him a stack of files. One of them was about the murder of Darius King. The case was marked as closed. The report said it was a gang fight, but something did not seem right. Jordan sat at his desk and read the file. The details were not clear. No weapon was found. The security cameras of the store were not working. There were no witnesses, but the report still blamed a gang. It did not make sense. Something felt wrong. He decided to visit the store where Darius was killed. The store smelled like old coffee and dusty shelves. The man at the counter looked tired. Jordan walked up to him and took out his notebook. "Sir, I have a few questions about what happened here," Jordan said. The man frowned. "I already talked to the police." "I know, but I just need to check something," Jordan said kindly. "The report says the cameras were not working. Is that true?" The man hesitated. He looked nervous. "That's what they told me to say." Jordan's heart started beating faster. "Who told you to say that?" "Look inside." A detective came in, took the footage, and told me to say my cameras were broken. Jordan felt a chill. Someone had taken the evidence. But why? Back at the station, he searched for more information. Darius had no record of being in a gang. Nothing about the case made sense. He decided to talk to Darius's best friend, Trey Dawson. Maybe Trey knew something. But when Jordan checked, he saw Trey had been arrested the same night Darius was killed. The charge? Drugs. And it was a serious charge. One that could put him in jail for years. It seemed strange. Too perfect. Jordan pushed away from his desk and went straight to his boss's office. He knocked once and walked in. Detective Holloway sat behind his desk. A cigarette burned in an ashtray. He looked up, but did not say anything. "What do you need, Wells?" Holloway asked. Jordan held up the file. "I looked at the Darius King case. Something is wrong. The store owner says the police took the security footage, and Trey Dawson was arrested right after Darius was killed. It looks like someone is hiding something." Holloway sighed and put out his cigarette. "You're wasting your time. Drop it," Holloway said firmly. "This case is closed. Darius King was just another gang kid in the wrong place." Jordan clenched his fists. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell Holloway he was wrong. But he could see the warning in his eyes. This was not just a simple case. Someone wanted the truth to stay hidden. But Jordan knew one thing. He was not going to let it stay buried. Jordan Wells sat at his desk, thinking hard. He could still hear Detective Holloway's voice telling him to stop asking questions. But something felt wrong. The case was not clear. Someone had hidden the truth, and Jordan could not ignore it. He had to keep looking, even if it meant breaking the rules. That evening, Jordan went back to the crime scene on Oakwood Avenue. The store was closed, and the street was quiet. A street light flickered above him. He walked slowly, looking around. Maybe he had missed something before. Then, he heard a sound. A window creaked open. He turned and saw an old woman peeking through her curtains. When she saw him, her eyes widened, and she quickly closed the window. Jordan walked to her door and knocked gently. After a moment, the door opened a little. "Mrs. Watson?" Jordan asked in a soft voice. "I am Officer Jordan Wells. I just want to ask you about the night Darius King was killed." The woman's hand shook as she held the door. She looked around, as if making sure no one was watching. "I don't know anything," she whispered. Jordan stayed calm. "I think you do, and I think you were scared." Mrs. Watson took a deep breath. She hesitated, then said very quietly, "I saw someone that night. A young man. He was near the boy before it happened." Jordan's heart beat faster. "Do you remember what he looked like?" The woman's face turned pale. "I can't talk about it," she said. Her voice was shaky. "It's not safe." She started to close the door. "Please," Jordan said. "You can help me find the truth." She shook her head. "The truth won't help anyone. It will only bring trouble." Then, she shut the door. Jordan stood there, staring at the door. Someone had scared her. Someone wanted her to stay quiet. He needed to find out why. Back at the station, Jordan looked through the case files again. He searched for anything that seemed strange. Then he saw it. The forensic report from the crime scene was missing. Gone. The only person who could remove it was a detective. Someone had erased important evidence. Jordan's chest tightened. This was not a mistake. It was a cover-up. That night, as he drove home, he noticed a car behind him. It stayed close, turning when he turned. His hands gripped the wheel. He turned down a side street. The car followed. His heart pounded. He sped up and pulled into his driveway. The car did not stop. It slowed down just enough for him to see a dark figure inside before it drove away. Jordan's stomach twisted. He got out of his car and froze. His front door had been spray painted with big red letters. "Leave it alone." His hands curled into fists. This was not just a warning. It was a threat. Someone was telling him to stop, and they were serious. The next morning at the station, he found a note in his locker. Last warning. Drop it. Jordan's heart pounded. He knew he should be afraid. And he was. But more than that, he was angry. Someone wanted to silence him. That meant he was getting close to the truth. Before he could act, his boss, Chief Delgado, called him into his office. The chief sat behind his desk, arms crossed. His face was serious. "You've been asking too many questions," Delgado said, ignoring orders. "Looking where you shouldn't." Jordan held up the file. "Sir, this case is not right. The store owner says police took the security footage. The forensic report is missing. A witness is too scared to talk. Someone is hiding the truth." Delgado sighed and leaned forward. "Listen, Wells. I know you want to do the right thing, but you don't understand how things work." Jordan frowned. "How things work?" The chief gave him a hard look. "If you want a future in this department, you need to know when to walk away." Jordan felt his chest tighten. He understood now. The message was clear. Drop the case, or lose his job. As he left the office, his mind was spinning. His own department wanted him to stop. They wanted him to forget everything. But he wasn't sure he could. Jordan sat in his car, holding the steering wheel tightly. His heart was pounding. The chief had told him to stop asking questions. He had been warned. But he couldn't stop now. Something was not right. He had to find out the truth. Back at the police station, Jordan waited until most of the officers had left. Then, he went into the records room. He searched carefully, moving old papers and checking hidden spots. After a long time, he found a folder stuck behind some files. His hands trembled as he opened it. It was the original forensic report from the crime scene. His eyes moved quickly over the words. Darius King had fought back before he was killed. His hands had scratches. There were fibers under his fingernails. Darius had not been attacked by a stranger. He had fought his killer. Jordan took a deep breath. The report had been hidden on purpose. Someone had erased the evidence to protect the murderer. He walked straight to Holloway's office and threw the report onto the desk. The older detective barely looked up. He took a slow drag from his cigarette. "You found something," Holloway said, not surprised. Jordan clenched his jaw. "Darius fought back, and you covered it up." Holloway blew out smoke and leaned back in his chair. "Be careful, kid. You don't want to go after these people." Jordan's fists tightened. "Who are these people?" Holloway gave a small smile. "You think this is about one murder? You have no idea how deep this goes." Jordan felt a chill down his spine. "I don't care how deep it goes. I want the truth." Holloway shook his head. "The truth is dangerous." Jordan turned to leave, but Holloway spoke again. "If you keep digging, you won't like what happens next." Jordan ignored him. He needed proof. He needed someone who would speak. He thought about Mrs. Watson. She had been scared before, but maybe now she would talk. He drove to her house and knocked on the door. At first, there was no answer. Then, the door opened slightly. "It's me, Officer Wells," Jordan said gently. "Please, I know you're scared, but I need your help." Mrs. Watson hesitated, then opened the door wider. Her hands were shaking, but there was something strong in her eyes. She took a deep breath. "I saw him," she whispered. "It was the judge's son, Ethan. He killed that poor boy." Jordan's stomach dropped. He had suspected it, but hearing her say it made it real. The judge's son. That was why the case had been hidden. That was why the evidence had disappeared. Mrs. Watson looked around nervously. "I didn't speak before. I knew they would come after me." Jordan nodded. "I won't let anything happen to you, but I need you to tell me everything you saw." She swallowed hard. "I couldn't sleep that night. I looked out my window. I saw Darius outside the store. Then Ethan walked up to him. They argued. Ethan hit him. Again and again. Darius tried to fight back, but Ethan was too strong. And then, her voice broke. He killed him." Jordan felt anger rise inside him. Now he knew the truth. But how could he prove it when the whole system was protecting Ethan Bradford? Jordan walked into the station, holding the forensic report and Mrs. Watson's statement. He had everything he needed. This was his chance to prove Ethan Bradford was guilty. He marched to Chief Delgado's office and placed the papers on his desk. "I have proof," Jordan said. "Ethan Bradford killed Darius King." Detective Holloway helped cover it up. The chief picked up the report and flipped through it without much interest. Then he sighed and set it down. "Sorry, Wells. I can't accept this." Jordan frowned. "Why not?" There were mistakes in how the evidence was handled, Delgado said. The court won't allow it. The case is closed. Jordan's stomach tightened. That's not true. You just don't want the truth to come out. The chief's face darkened. Be careful, Wells. You've already been warned. Jordan left the office, his heart pounding. He knew they would fight him, but this was worse than he expected. That evening, he turned on the news. Judge Bradford stood in front of cameras, speaking to reporters. These false accusations against my son are just an attack on my family, the judge said smoothly. Officer Wells is reckless. He's trying to damage our reputation. Jordan clenched his fists. The judge was lying, and people were believing him. Jordan saw the way other officers looked at him. He heard the whispers. They thought he was making things up. That night, as Jordan walked to his car, he saw Ethan leaning against a black SUV. The young man smirked. You really think you can stop me? Ethan laughed. You don't get it, do you? My father owns this city. You're just a cop who doesn't know when to quit. Jordan's jaw tightened. He wanted to hit him, but that was what Ethan wanted. Jordan took a deep breath and walked away. Later that night, Jordan met Holloway in a small diner. The detective stirred his coffee and sighed. You can't win this, kid. Men like Bradford don't go to prison. They make the rules. Jordan stared at him. So you knew the whole time? Holloway nodded. Of course. I helped cover it up. Jordan's pulse raced, but he stayed calm. He had left his phone recording in his pocket. Holloway had just confessed. The next day, Jordan was called into Delgado's office again. This time, the chief wasn't warning him. You're suspended, Wells, Delgado said, handing him a letter. Internal Affairs is investigating you for misconduct. Jordan held the paper, feeling the weight of what was happening. They wanted him to stop, but he wasn't giving up. That night, Jordan met with a trusted prosecutor, someone outside the corrupt system. He handed them the recording. This is all I have, but it's enough. A few days later, the news broke. The state started an independent investigation. Holloway was arrested first. To save himself, he testified against Judge Bradford. The judge lost his position. Even then, Judge Bradford refused to admit he was guilty. But Ethan wasn't so lucky. He was finally arrested and charged with murder. Jordan watched the news from his apartment, a tired but satisfied smile on his face. The fight had cost him everything, but it was worth it. Justice had finally come for the Bradfords.